Ladies and gentlemen, our 26th Secretary of Defense, General Jim Mattis.
Thanks, ladies and gentlemen. And thank you, General. It's a delight to be here. I will tell you that, God, I didn't realize, can't see some of you. Hello over there. I would just tell you that it's wonderful to be here. I'm a little humbled because after some of my public remarks, I'm not often invited to speak in polite company anymore. It's one of those things, but I was actually assigned the topics I was to talk about tonight. I think that was because Chris Woodbridge and I served together in our younger days, and he was concerned if I had just given carte blanche that I might go off on one of those Seattle off-ramps to nowhere, and who knows where we'd end up, probably be invading Moscow or something when he got done. But I was told I was to talk about the Marine Corps. Great, we love that one, huh? And Force Design 2030, a lot of syllables and stuff there, but I'll get through that. I'm still amazed to this day that I was allowed to spend so many years in the Marine Corps. I was never the greatest Marine. I was an average Marine, and some people can say, oh no, that's false modesty and that sort of thing. No, actually, it's not. The Marine Corps trains us all well. I was well trained. The average Marine's pretty darn good in my book. But I will tell you that I'm average. I happen to be in the right place at the right time after time. And you get to my color hair and you look back and you realize what did you earn and what was just good fortune. I was a very, very fortunate Marine to spend 43 years in this gun club. I come here to this great all-American city, this city with big shoulders. Chicago is Chicago. And it's a reminder to me that I didn't serve in the Marine Corps for 43 years. I served in the U.S. Marine Corps. We're accountable to the American people. We belong to the American people. We represent the American people. And many, as you will understand, many young sailors and Marines, and later in my career, soldiers, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, Allied forces created my reputation. This is not a night among Marines with the number of Marines we have here to be anything other than honest. And the blood, sweat, and tears of all those troops and their families are what gained me a lot of the reputation that I have here today. And so tonight, what I want to do is pay my respect to those sailors and Marines who raised me, the Vietnam generation that raised me in the Marine Corps and taught me my Graham skills till I was ready when things came my way. But also to the Gold Star mothers and fathers, Modi, an eternal gratitude for what those families paid for our and laid down as a sacrifice on our altar of freedom. I think too that there's no better place to talk about these subjects. I was told to talk about this Force Design 2030 and military transformation, the Marine Corps, and talk a little bit about the country. And here at the Marine Corps Association, this is an organization that I owe a lot to because of what it did for me personally, but more than that, what it did for a Corps that when I called on them and sent them in and said, you're going in, I sent them in with full confidence. And I'll speak more to that in a minute. But the reason an average Marine like me can come up here and represent the Marine Corps and do it very well is simply because Marines have no institutional confusion about what their role is in the world. Their role is to fight and fight very, very well. It is to protect our country, our way of life, our people, and protect and uphold the Constitution. And from the youngest Marine to the oldest, from the 17-year-old private to the old retired general, we're all co-equal in that mission. And the words, once a Marine, always a Marine, come to mind. My introduction to the Marine Corps ethos came in the summer of 1969. I was 18 years old. What they'd done, our OSO, Officer Selection Officer, had gone through due to casualties in Vietnam in '69 and gone through all the list of all the reserve Marines who'd been signed up, and he just switched our orders from MCRD San Diego to Quantico. And so when I got the telegram telling me to go to the airport and pick up my ticket to go to Washington, I thought, whoa, they identified some real quality right up front, you know? The young sergeant who met us at National Airport quickly disabused us of that idea, and we were on our way. But my introduction came from a corporal, because about the third day there, we were issued our rifles, our M14s, and the young fellow gave some very blunt guidance to each one of them. And he said the same thing to the guy a couple in front of me, and then the guy in front of me, and then to me, and probably to the band behind me. He said, he handed the rifle to us, had us read off the serial number, of course. And he said, this is your best friend. Point it at no one unless you're prepared to pull the trigger. No false threats, in other words. And little did I know that at age 18, I just received some of the guidance that would guide me into positions and ideologies and confronting other people's ideas all the way through until I was in my 60s and serving in the Secretary of Defense. I could never have anticipated that corporal's guidance would resonate with me right down through those years. And it made a world of difference for reasons I'll also address a little bit later here. But let me share some thoughts about our times and about the Marines' role in the defense of this great big experiment that we call America. Because we gather at the time when we have the most significant challenges to our democracy, probably since the Cuban Missile Crisis, which is before most of our young Marines and sailors in the audience were born. Make no mistake, Russia's latest invasion of Ukraine, commencing last February, that was their second invasion of Ukraine, as you know, is the seminal challenge of our time. It's like a symbols clash, I think, ladies and gentlemen, ending a very dishonest decade. This is a time when we're going to have to make clear what we stand for, and more importantly, what we don't stand for, what we will not stand for. Immediately after China's President Xi and Russia's President Putin declared in February their partnership without limits, Putin unleashed that unprovoked attack on Ukraine, and they coupled two theaters by their own words, both Putin's and Xi's. They coupled the transatlantic European theater to the Indo-Pacific theater, something that should ring very, very loudly to any Marines on active duty in this room. And the attack on other nations' sovereignty, their territory, their diplomatic positions demonstrate the contempt that those leaders have for smaller nations, as well as the autocrats' willingness to violate peace and any international norms. And with their mindset that the West, and I'm going to note here, especially the United States, was in irretrievable decline, together they are standard bearers for the authoritarian alternative to our democratic model of governance. From Iran to North Korea and elsewhere, the authoritarians today feel the wind at their backs. They think they've got us on the run right now. That's the only way you could explain the behavior we're seeing. Coming into a job I never aspired to, when I was made the Secretary of Defense, we created a strategy that articulated this reality, focusing our military on the threats expressed in word and action by our foes. And I would tell you, ladies and gentlemen, that a leader's primary responsibility in any line of work is to define reality. You cannot let your people in your organization, whether it be a corporation, a football team, a military unit, a country, you cannot let them live in a dream world. And we composed a strategy with the help of allies from Europe to Asia and the US Congress, both Republicans and Democrats. And that strategy has held firm since January 2018, guiding our military's priorities as they adapt to these emerging threats. You'll remember in 2017, we were still principally focused on counterinsurgency. I saw my job as Secretary of Defense as superintending a military that would ensure our diplomats were heard and respected, since diplomacy without force to back it up has been likened to an orchestra without instruments. And having signed hundreds of next of kin letters, Modi, I signed myself a mission of keeping the peace, or what passed for peace, One more year, one more week, one more day, one more hour, so our diplomats could work their magic from a position of strength, encouraging our foes to step back from military action where they would face their longest and their worst day. And that would be on the battlefield if they met us. Further, believing we had over-militarized our foreign policy over the preceding 25 years, that's not a partisan statement, both parties had been in office, we had to get State Department back into the leading role of guiding our actions on the international stage. In leading the largest corporation in the world, I instituted only 3 lines of effort. The first one was to the service chiefs, and they were told that we are going to create a more lethal military in the face of the changing face of war. And they knew what to do. The Chief of Staff of the Army knew what to do in the Army. Commandant of the Marine Corps knew what to do. Chief of Naval Operations, the rest. I also wanted to build deeper trust with friends and expand the number of allies. And I wanted to reform the Department of Defense business practices to win Congress's confidence that they could give us more money and we wouldn't waste it. It was no surprise the Marine Corps was in the front rank on increasing lethality on that line of effort. For while Marines were never confused and never have been about their mission being to fight and to win, it has adapted repeatedly to be the most ready when the nation is least ready. What we're seeing today in the Ukraine makes clear that old methods of warfare will not pass war's audit in the future, even while the fundamental nature of war will level its unchanging, its extraordinary physical, mental, and spiritual demands on our troops that we send into battle. War, we must remember, is the cruelest and most penetrating auditor of any human endeavor on the planet. You cannot hide anything when that auditor comes knocking. In this context, in the Fleet Marine Force, every week is considered the last week of peace, and Marines must be ready using every week to prepare. To quote a dead commie, I even read dead commies, you may not be interested in war, but war is interested in you, and Marines take that to heart. Thus, you can understand the urgency today as Marines deal with their next battle now. For we know that the foreseeable future is not. The foreseeable future is not foreseeable. Yet there are guideposts there, emerging out of the fog of wars being fought on the other side of the world, and they must be acted on now. For to lose time is to give the most unforgiving factor in the equation of our defense to our future enemies. At short glance, we can look at Marine adaptation, and it's very helpful right now. Until World War I, Marines were simply naval infantry, sprinkled across ships. We'd get them together when we had to do a landing somewhere, and that's the way we worked. World War I saw the Marines as trench assault forces. Coming home from that war, many believed that trench assault was their future, and they needed to perfect those tactics. But in the interwar years, naval war games, and we ran them repeatedly in the Caribbean, ended in failure until the Navy Marine Corps team made 3 changes. One, they learned they had to have aircraft with the fleet, and they built aircraft carriers to carry the airplanes. 2, they had to keep the fleet at sea. They couldn't go back to refuel and rearm, so they made logistic ships. And most germane to this audience, they created mobile amphibious assault troops. We call it the Fleet Marine Force, to deliberately seize advanced bases. We were turning our backs on trench assault. And there were vociferous debates, very heartfelt debates. And they were the order of the day. At Gallipoli, some people said, hadn't the British proven that amphibious assaults could never succeed? Wasn't the respected French military pouring most of their French dollars into impregnable forts, the ultimate trench lines, basically, coming out of World War I? They're going to build even better trenches. They call it the Maginot Line. The productive and disciplined arguments to and fro in the Marine Corps Gazette, the Marine Corps Association's magazine, the trial and error, the failure and success in war games all went on. But the Marines accepted the reality that while they wouldn't get the future 100% right, they must not get it 100% wrong. Their results were validated when war broke out in 1940 in Europe, and the French had gotten it 100% wrong. for the Germans were able to restore maneuver to the battlefield in the form of blitzkrieg, effectively turning the French forts on the Maginot Line into holding pens for French soldiers to be made prisoners of war. The French Republic fell to the fascists, and only the United Nations, ably led by the Americans' greatest generation, regained freedom for France that could not have recovered absent the Allied armies paying a very, very heavy butcher's bill. 2 weeks ago, I visited Normandy, struck again with the costs paid by the democracies to roll back fascism. The greatest generation returned home from war with this view: it's a crummy world, and like it or not, we're part of it. They did not turn their backs on it. They'd been through a depression, they'd been through a world war. Instead, they led the world into a better place, and in the process, they built America into the enormously more prosperous country than they had known during their lifetime, growing up during an economic depression. When I was assigned as a NATO Supreme Allied Commander, when I had lunch in Washington, D.C. with the Australian ambassador to Washington, and he mentioned to me that, you know, America made the single most self-sacrificial pledge in world history after World War II. I'm looking across the table. There's only two of us at the lunch, sitting in his backyard there. And I'm thinking, I got to know as much history about America as this Australian fellow. And I was thinking, the United Nations, you know, we'd put it together. We signed the treaty in 1946. There were 44 countries. By the way, one of the independent countries that signed it was one called Ukraine. So if Mr. Putin thinks they're not an independent country, he has something coming. But that wasn't really a sacrificial part of of America. So I said, maybe Bretton Woods 1 and 2. You and I know it as the IMF and the World Bank, so that people who are losing all hope about their future, that their kids aren't going to be able to come up in a good world, they don't have to turn to a fascist Mussolini to make the trains run on time. There were lenders of last resort. And and they can return hope to people and start creating wealth again. He said, no, not Bretton Woods. He said that was just America thinking how to prevent another world depression. I said, oh, it must have been the Marshall Plan, where we reached out to the countries we'd been fighting 3 years before, and we brought them locomotives and made loans to them and put Germany and Italy, Japan back, welcomed the people of Germany, Italy, and Japan and other parts of Europe back into the community of nations after what we'd just been through with the Nazis. 3 years later, think of the greatest generation. He said, no, that just shows how unique and generous America was. I'm running out of ideas now. And he says, it was NATO. He said, you recalled to active duty from being president of Columbia University, the most trusted general in the world, Dwight D. Eisenhower, and you stood up NATO, and you pledged 100 million dead Americans in a nuclear war to protect democracy in Western Europe. Interesting, isn't it, that it took a foreigner to teach me that lesson? I'd never been taught that one in my history classes. So he said, you could have said, Europe, that's twice in 25 years, you dragged us into your silly, stupid wars, and we lost a lot of our boys as a result. You're through, you're on your own with the Russians. We're turning to Asia, Latin America, Africa. We don't need any more of this, what you've dragged us into. He said, no, you didn't do that. But what was the history lesson that guided the greatest generation? Why did they do that? They just didn't do it out of some nonchalant view of they would do it after all they'd been fighting there a few years before. The lesson that guided them was that nations with allies thrive and nations without allies wither. And you're watching Russia right now wither before your eyes. I was privileged to fight many times for our country, like many of you in this room. And I never fought in an all-American formation. Lieutenant Ord, then Lieutenant Woodbridge, the rest of you remember that were in that battalion that cleared the minefields for the 1st Marine Division, that we had 50 Arabs inside our battalion, Arab troops there. Every war I've ever fought in, every battle I've ever fought in, I have fought alongside foreign troops. We need to recall their greatest generation's approach, having paid the price that they had paid in blood and treasure. We need to relearn today the lesson about having allies and treating them with respect. Yes, it's hard to fight with allies. Churchill put it well. He said, the only thing harder than fighting with allies is fighting without them. Think about that. But as I reminded my American officers at CENTCOM, where we had 77 nations when I commanded there, in United States Central Command, we had 77 nations that had officers or troops embedded in the U.S. command. They trusted us that much. And I would remind them, not all the good ideas come from the nation with the most aircraft carriers. But that said, naval forces are uniquely positioned to breed confidence in our allies and to temper our adversaries' mischief. Diplomats would agree with this, I might add. The seasoned diplomats, and we have great diplomats in America, they will sometimes agree that the best ambassador is a man-of-war ship, a naval ship in the harbor signaling that America is with them, a naval task force with Marines ready to land, strong fighters with fighting spirit to match their weapons, plus the tactics to confound the enemy. That's the nature of the naval service. That's what they're for. So the current debate about whether the Marines should be fighting this way or that way and what the tactics are, in terms of the adapted doctrine, this is, I would just tell you, this is historically validated that they go through this right now. Every lesson of history says the Marine Corps is doing the right thing by not saying, we're just going to continue doing what we did in the past and expect that's going to work. The Commandant is doing exactly what is right. When I was assigned as the NATO Supreme Allied Commander, we had transformation of NATO as our responsibility. I hadn't studied much of that. I'd studied a lot about fighting. So I read 22 books, called around, talked to the experts, and every time two of the experts agreed and recommended a certain book, I would write that one down. And I went and read those books. And what I learned there is every military, since Alexander the Great, and he's called the Great for a reason, every military that's successfully modernized, successfully transformed, did so on the basis of one thing. They specifically identified a military deficiency and set out to solve it. And they specified it, defined it to a Jesuit's level of satisfaction. And some of you have been to Jesuit school, you know what that means. That lesson from history is now permeating every level of the Marine discussion today, as it should, and we can see it in the Marine Gazette, and we can hear it in the happy hours. Einstein, and I'm told he is a real smart fellow, he was asked once how he would compose his thinking if given 1 hour to save the world in a time of crisis. And he's alleged to have said he should spend 55 minutes defining the problem and gaining consensus on the problem, and then he would save the world in 5 minutes. So get everybody together and figure out what is the problem. So the vigorous debate going on now across the Corps is exactly what our nation needs and expects of today's Marines. We're not an elite unit because of and formidable warfighters based on raising the flag on Mount Suribachi on Iwo Jima some 85 years ago. Rather, we are elite because we hold fast to our naval warrior culture while showing intellectual agility to outthink our foes in today's circumstances, not yesterday's. It's also a hard debate we have to have, and to come to grips with the reality that what won past wars may not be fit for the purpose today. It's the Marine Corps Association with its flagship periodical that provided the primary platform for identifying problems to be further defined in our past, and it's doing it again today. For you who support the Marine Corps Association, please understand that with our military serving a free society, it is our Marine Corps you are supporting, and by direct extension, it's our country, it's our next generation, it's our allies, it's our freedom, and it's all those who are going to confront the next challenge to democracy, a form of government that remains, in Ronald Reagan's words, only one generation from extinction unless we understand the gift we owe our children and are willing to fight for it. The ongoing debate is important and it is urgent. It demands disciplined but unregimented thinking, for storm clouds are already on the horizon, even as the character of war is fast changing in a dynamic world awash in change. And there's a broader point worth making as I expand this talk, one drawn from history but applicable to our current time. Speaking in 1940 to the Harvard class of 1910 at their 30th reunion, Walter Lippmann said these words as war clouds were gathering for World War II. And the words brought some clarity to me as I thought about them, rereading them recently for a class I teach at a university. Lippmann said, upon the standard to which the wise and honest will now repair, it is written, you have lived the easy way, henceforth you will live the hard way. You came into a great heritage made by the insight and the sweat and the blood of inspired and devoted and courageous men. Thoughtlessly and in utmost self-indulgence, you have all but squandered this inheritance. Now, only by the heroic virtues which made this inheritance can you restore it again. You took the good things for granted, now you must earn them again. For every right that you cherish, you have a duty which you must fulfill. For every hope that you entertain, you have a task that you must perform. For every good that you wish to preserve, you will have to sacrifice your comfort and your ease. There is nothing for nothing any longer. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I highlight this statement not because I think war is in the offing tonight as we sit here in Chicago. My biggest concern is not the Chinese Air Force bombing us tonight or the inept Russian army shelling Chicago. Even after 4.5 decades of defending the country from external enemies and focusing totally upon that, and even in the face of the terrorists that many of us fought and the autocrats who mean us harm, I haven't seen them able to change our way of life yet. No, today, as our Marines hone new skills to win on future battlefields, my biggest concern isn't a foreign threat. Rather, it's what we're doing to our own country. And now I must speak from the heart on the issue that worries me most. For by showing contempt for each other in our country, vice listening with respect to our fellow citizens with different ideas, by characterizing those with different ideas as disloyal or even as terrorists, we are in effect cheering on our adversaries and doing damage to our own country that no foreign power can do. We are destroying trust in each other and our institutions, even degrading the very foundations of the country that we are still building. For America is always a work in progress. Today's situation recalls a question that Americans considered from the beginning of our country, one that at least we used to ponder for the very danger that they recognized in our earlier days if we did not cultivate respect for this experiment that we brought to life. In 1789, Benjamin Franklin walks out of Philadelphia's Constitutional Convention and he's asked, well, what is it, Mr. Franklin, a monarchy or a republic? And his reply was, a republic, madam, if we can keep it. George Washington, in his first State of the Union message to Congress, noted that America was an experiment, and he knew well that experiments can fail. 1814, Battle of Fort McHenry, an American lawyer held hostage on board ships of the most powerful fleet in the Navy in the world, the most powerful Navy in the world, the British Royal Fleet. He writes a poem, and in it, it became our Star-Spangled Banner. He writes, oh, say does that star-spangled flag still fly? The banner still fly. 1863, President Lincoln dedicated a cemetery at Gettysburg for the soldiers killed in action, determining if a government of the people, by the people, for the people can long exist, or is it going to perish? But even more revealing was 25 years earlier, as a young political guy trying for office, he gave a speech at the Young Men's Lyceum in Springfield. And he basically warned of the destruction that we could face. And in the speech, he talked about, could we fall if all the armies of Europe and Asia and Africa, with all the money in their military treasury, even under a Bonaparte, he calls him. Remember, Napoleon had died only a few years previous to when he was born. Could they make it over the Ohio and take a drink out of the Ohio River and get over the Blue Ridge Mountains? He said, never. He basically said that that's not going to happen. We would destroy them. If destruction is going to be our lot, we will ourselves be our author. As a nation of free men, we live through time or we die by suicide. So that's how they looked at it in those days. They recognized the danger to this fragile thing that we call democracy. It's worth contemplating now, I think, do we really think we can tear down our faith in this country, our faith in each other, our faith in our institutions without some kind of consequence and not pay the price? Or are you not going to fail in our responsibility to future generations? Do we think that Americans have an ordained right to survive, that we have an ordained right to victory on the battlefield that cannot be taken away by tyrants? That's not what George Washington or Thomas Jefferson or Abe Lincoln thought. And I don't think it's what FDR said in his words either, as he said a prayer for the lads landing at Normandy, or John F. Kennedy or Ronald Reagan either. The sailors and Marines I led all signed a blank check payable to each of us in this room with their lives. They deserve in compensation people with an affection for our freedom and our values, not a mere thank you for your service as they get walking down the street. This is what we owe each other. This is what we owe the next generation. We must turn this country over in better condition than we found it. We're building a country here, I mentioned. It's hard work and it's never done, for a government of the people, by the people, and for the people must always be adapting to new circumstances. But it's hard work, but also noble work, worthy of our best effort. And as Bill Clinton put it, nothing is wrong with America that what is right about America can't fix. So this evening, let's all of us here commit to honor the Marines manning the ramparts by doing our share of making e pluribus unum, or out of many one, more than just words on the coins in our pocket. In my years of active service and on my many military campaigns, I always knew that our Marines would move against the enemy and it'd be a bad day for the enemy. And with strong, cunning NCOs and junior officers, I knew the skill and ferocity of the lads would bring us victory in every firefight. So confident of the outcome of the battle, my personal concentration was on how to lose the fewest number of our young men. And that remains the sobering, even heartbreaking side of the duty that I had for those years. The question today is, will we, the people, keep faith with our founding fathers' vision? Will we keep faith with each other? Will we sustain the institutions that enable a democracy to govern? In so doing, we would be living up to our responsibility to the next generation, to what Thomas Jefferson called usufruct. It's spelled U-S-U-F-R-U-C-T. And if you think about it, you'll know why I never drink 2 beers and say it in public. He was a farmer, and to him, holding the land in usufruct meant you can cut down the trees, plow the ground, rechannel the streams, do with it whatever you wish. But you are obligated to turn the land over to your daughter or your son in as good a condition or better than you received it. I remain confident that our soldiers, our sailors, airmen, Coast Guardsmen, and Marines will hold the line against external foes, no doubt whatsoever in my mind. But I leave you this evening with the question, will we, the people, carry out our duty to leave the country in as good a condition or better than the greatest generation gave to us? Are we willing to accept that others have ideas worth our consideration even when we disagree? After all, we, the people, are the first words in our Constitution. There is no us or them in that document. All it takes is one glance at the world, according to Russia or China, to remind us of what is at stake in our children's future. Walter Lippmann's reunion words should energize us to do again what he called for in 1940, and only together can we do that. You know, I mentioned earlier I learned a lot about our country by talking to foreigners. I even learned a lot about our country talking to enemies. And it happened in a summer, very hot summer of 2004 in a place called Al Anbar. And at that time, we were in an area, the Marines were assigned an area about the size of North Carolina, and we had fewer soldiers, sailors, and Marines to try to put down an active insurgency than North Carolina had police officers. We were losing troops every day. It's over 120 degrees every day with humidity in the 90% and above area. And I had 29 sailors and Marines in their 5 vehicles who moved me a 2-star all around the battlefield. In a matter of 4 months of those 29 troops, 17 of those lads would be killed or wounded around me. And I wasn't in the tough fight. I was a general. I wasn't down in the infantry units doing what they do. And I got reminded during that time that America's got 2 fundamental sources of power. One that I'm very proud of is the power of intimidation. And if you try to mess with this country, you attack us on 9/11 thinking if you hurt us, you'll scare us, we will go after you. And I'm very proud of our US military and our CIA. I'm very proud of our Marine Corps. I make no apology for my time defending this country. I'm proud of the privilege to have been fought for it. But even stronger than our power of intimidation is our power of inspiration. And I pulled into an outpost. We had an outpost line over near the Syrian border, north and south the Euphrates River. And its job was to intercept the foreign fighters coming in from Syria and some from as far away as the Lebanon's Bekaa Valley, very well trained. And if they get through the Marine outpost line, if they get into Baghdad, they're going to kill US soldiers, they're going to kill innocent Iraqis. So about midnight one night, I pull into a young lieutenant's 40 troops dug in little fighting holes, living out there rough in the heat and everything. We'd had trouble getting there. We'd had to fight our way through again just to get there. And when the sun came up, he came over to brief me in the morning. We're sitting there in the dirt, and he's explaining to me how he's keeping contact with the other outposts, where he's lost troops, how many enemies killed, the normal stuff of a young man 18 months out of his undergraduate time leading his Marines and sailors in the rough times. And he said, by the way, General, we caught a guy carrying an IED trying to lay it on the road you came in on last night. That's kind of personal. And he said he spent over 2 years in London. He's an engineer. He speaks perfect English. You want to talk to him? I said, sure. So the lieutenant got done briefing me and walked off. And a little while later, a lance corporal comes over with obviously a very disgruntled fellow with his hands tied together and sits him down there in the dirt next to me. And I could tell he was Sunni. You hadn't been a good night, obviously, you know. He's out there digging his hole. He's got his 2 artillery rounds in a wheelbarrow. And he looks up and there's 5 guys with automatic rifles pointed at him. And he knows his 401k retirement plan is just shot, okay? And I could tell he was Sunni. I said, what are you doing this for? We're the Marines, you're Sunnis. We're the only friends you've got in this frickin' place. Why are you trying to kill us? And he started in on one of those rants. He said, oh, you Jews, you Americans, you're here to steal the oil. I said, no, actually, we're not. I pull my wallet out every time I pump gas in my car. You're an educated man, just go away. I'm not going to waste my time listening to this crap. And a Marine stepped forward to take him off, and he said, can I sit here for a minute? So I motioned the Marine back. And after a couple minutes of trying to regain his composure, we got him a cup of coffee, and he's shaking so bad, he's spilling it and everything. He says, I just don't like having foreign troops in my country. Man to man, I respect that. I wouldn't want them in my country. I have no problem with that. I'd fight too. So we talked some more about his family. They'd been forced out of Baghdad by the Civil War. A lot of Sunnis got run out of town. And he'd rented a house over on the Euphrates River about 10 kilometers away. Had a wife and 2 daughters. Talked a little more, and the sun's getting up there. Time for me to move on to the next outpost. So I'm getting up, and he says, am I going to jail? I said, oh, yeah. You're going to be wearing an orange jumpsuit in Abu Ghraib for a good long time for this little stunt. You're lucky you're not dead. And he says, do you think, General, and I want you to listen to this, if I'm a model prisoner, Do you think my family and I could immigrate to America when I get out of Abu Ghraib? Now think about that, ladies and gentlemen. On the day when your beloved country has most frustrated you, when you're ready to throw your iced tea at the television, watching whatever news channel you're watching designed to infuriate you, on the day when you're starting to just lose faith in everything, just remember that guy halfway around the world, full of hatred right then for the foreign truth in his country. He would give anything to be living right here in Chicago right now, and his two daughters going to school out in town. So keep the faith. Let's work together. Let's put it back together. We owe it to the troops we sent in harm's way. Thanks very much.